Ms. May.
Okay, Mr. Mayor, whenever you're ready.
Good morning. Welcome to the budget meeting for the City of Sugar Land. First item on the agenda, public comment. Thomas, do we have anybody in the public comment part?
No, sir.
Item number 2, ordinances and resolutions. 2A, first and final consideration. Consideration of an action on City of Sugar Land ordinances number 2204, an ordinance of the City Council of the City of Sugar Land, Texas, revising ordinances 2190 and 2199 to update the election date, canvassing dates, early voting dates, and early voting locations for the November 3rd, 2020 election, and providing for other matters relating to the election. That's me, but Thomas, I'm going to turn it back to you.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Good morning, Mayor, Council. This is third verse of our election from May 2nd, 2020. As a reminder, the governor did allow for those having May elections to postpone their elections to November 3rd due to pandemic conditions with COVID-19. I'll be very brief, so we're going to remind the public of the candidate positions and the charter propositions that will be on the November 3rd ballot. Just as a point of clarification, the May filing period has passed, so this does not reopen the candidate filing period for the November 3rd election. This order that you're looking at this morning revises the election date to November 3rd, revises the early voting period to October 13th through October 30th. And yes, that is an additional week of early voting. The governor issued an executive order allowing that to happen due to pandemic conditions. And it also revises polling locations, and particularly for early voting here in Fort Bend County. Last but not least, this will also revise the canvassing for the November election. The canvassing period should take place between November 6th through November 14th. Tentatively, we are set to hold a special city council meeting on November 10th to canvass the election and swear in the newly elected officers. Next slide, please. So as a reminder, the mayoral position is on the ballot, as well as the at-large positions 1 and position 2. Right now, all the positions are at large, so it is a citywide election, meaning you can live in any district and vote for the candidates. Right now, there are no opponents. Well, there are no opponents in the May election. In the mayoral election and in at-large 1, and there is a contested race in at-large 2. So there will be votes that will need to be cast, so we cannot cancel this election. The candidate filing deadline for this race was in February on Valentine's Day at 5 p.m. So as mentioned earlier, that is closed, and we currently have a active candidate profile site that was activated on February 14th. Next slide, please.
Thomas, I think you had it backwards.
Yeah, it's at-large 1 has a contested election. That's Himesh, and he's term limited. At-large 2 and the mayor are uncontested.
Yes, sir. That's correct. Sorry, not enough coffee this morning. To recap on the charter positions, there are 9 propositions on the ballot. One is, and they are labeled as AB all the way on the ballot, but for simplicity's sake for the slide, I won't go through all these, but just to kind of recap them for you. It talks about increasing term limits, voter ID, and requiring votes on all ordinances and resolutions. Next slide, please. Has a resign to run provision that's being proposed. Looks at petition signatures for initiatives and referendums, as well as petition signatures for the recall of a mayor at-large council member, and as well for a district member, and also talks about forfeiture and crimes of moral turpitude. Next slide, please. So now the meats of what we're doing today. Again, as mentioned earlier, the early voting period is extended by a week, October 13th through October 20th. For this election, the polling locations for early voting, the proposed, have increased from 22 to 30. And the 9 proposed Sugar Land locations is an increase from 7 to 9. And you can see all those locations there. Just one quick remark. One of the things we are doing a little bit differently with City Hall this year is not only having it as an early voting location in which voting will be out in the lobby, but we are also going to be a site for weekend voting as well, too, during the early voting period. Next slide. The election day polling locations, too many to list, but it is vote centers, so just know that these locations will be on the website that's listed there below. November 3rd is the election day, and within Sugar Land, there are 19 proposed locations, which I believe this is another increase from 17 to 19 as proposed for May. Next slide, please. So with that, staff recommends that Mayor and City Council approve on first and final reading ordinance number 2204, revising ordinances number 2190 and 2199, updating election date, canvassing date, early voting date, and early voting locations for November 3rd.
Motion to approve.
So,
Got a motion and I've got a second. Any questions? You'll vote at this time, please.
Mayor, can you hear me?
Yes, sir.
I am unable to vote and notice, so I think we'll have to.
Let's do a roll call vote. Hamesh? Roll call vote. Hamesh? That's a yay. Stewart?
Yeah, yay.
Stewart?
Aye.
Nishan?
Aye.
Steve?
Aye.
Jennifer?
Aye.
Carol?
Aye.
And I'm an aye. It passes 7-0. Thank you all.
yes, Mayor.
Item number 3, Budget 3A, review of and discussion on the proposed fiscal year 2021 annual budget and 5-year capital improvement program, 2021 through 2025, inclusive of all funds and forecasts. We have Jennifer Brown, Director of Finance, and Rosita Bashoon, Budget Manager, and Jesse Lee, our City Engineer. Jennifer, are you going to start us out?
Actually, Mayor, Rosita is going to take this one this morning, but I would like to say a few words at the end. Rosita, go ahead. Unmute yourself. Rosita, you're muted.
There we go.
Can you hear me now?
We can hear you now.
Okay, thank you very much, Mayor. At this morning budget workshop, we'll be covering the debt service funds as well as the FY 21 through 25 general CIP. I'll be taking care of the debt service fund, while Jesse will be covering the general CIP. Our first, I'll start off with the tax back debt service fund. Next slide, please. This fund accounts for the repayment of tax-back debt. Its main source of revenue is property taxes. The proposed debt service tax rate is 0.13345 cents for FY21, along with a homestead exemption of 12%. There are 3 transfers into this fund, one from the tourism, one from the fund, one from the utility fund, and one from the enclave at River Park. Next, please. Property tax has been a stable source of revenue even with the ongoing pandemic. Transfers in for property tax makes up 74.2% of the debt service revenue, while Transfers in make up 25.4%. Although sales tax is not a direct revenue source for this fund, it's a direct revenue source for funds transferring in and therefore impacts the debt service fund revenues. Next, please. This slide shows the financial management policy statement's direction on property taxes after Senate Bill 2. I'm not going to read it through, however, this provides the guidelines for the preparation of the debt service fund. Next, please. Also from the financial management policy statement is the guidance on the debt capacity. Next. Revenue assumptions for debt service excludes any growth from revaluation, and this allows us to shift from the debt to M&O within the existing tax rate to meet the operational needs. Next, please. The tax rate required to fund the FY21 budget and CIP is 0.33650 cents, which is an increase of 0.0045 cents. Next, please. So, one of the city's goal measures is the net bonded debt as it relates to population and assessed values. And over the last 4 years, we've been consistently below the targets. These goal measures are evaluated by our rating agencies to determine the debt load carried by the city and how sustainable it is. Next, please. The total projected expenditures for FY20 budget is $42.50 million, which is 1.98 lower than the budget. This decrease is due to the refunding of debt and the debt structure for the FY20 bonds which were issued last October. Total FY21 expenditures are $30.5 million, which includes $28.72 for debt service and rebates and assignment for a total of $1.78 million. Next, please. For FY20, the over policy balance is $4.49 million. For FY21, the net change is negative $1.72 with an ending fund balance of $5.46 million. And with a policy requirement of $2.87 million, this fund ends over policy at $2.59 million. Next, please. Now I'll get into the 5-year forecast. Next, please. Several assumptions were taken into account for the preparation of the forecast. We use a base revenue for FY21 property tax with no growth from revaluation. The 3 cents rate increase spreads over 4 years, while the GEO bond projects are phased over 4 years. The transfers in continues for the 5 years, as well as the MUD rebates, which is equal to 50% of city taxes collected, and the fund meets a fund balance policy throughout the forecast. Next, please. The debt service forecast assumes no growth in property tax revenue from revaluation, with a base rate of $20.56 million for each year. The only growth in revenue here is based on the 3 cent increase for the GEO bonds. Here you can see how the growth in revenue is coming from the increase from the tax rate to implement the GEO bonds, with a total increase of 3 cents over 4 years. Total revenues for FY21 is $28.78 million, and this grows to $30.6 million in FY25. Next, please. With the growth in revenues from the tax rate increase, we are able to issue GEO bonds over 5 years and support the additional debt service payment, which is shown here as new debt service. The increase in the tax revenue combined with the decrease in the debt service payment from existing debt gives us the capacity to fund new debt. Next, please. This chart shows our current outstanding debt, and the decline in the debt service payment is what helps us to build capacity to issue new debt within the debt service tax rate. Next, please. This chart shows the current outstanding debt along with the GEO bonds from the 2019 election as proposed in the 5-year CIP. Next, please. So our taxable debt service fund, this fund records the taxable debt service for debt issued for the Smart Financial Center, lease paid monthly in arrears on the first of the month and resets January 1st based on debt service payment. Terms of the agreement is a debt service reserve, which is equal to the last 3 years of the debt service payment schedule, with additional 25% in rent from January 2019. Next, please. For FY20 projection, total revenues are 1.36 million and debt service payment of 1.59 million, with a net change negative of 0.23 million and an ending fund balance of 0.70 million. For FY21 budget, total revenues are 1.78 million, with a debt service payment of 1.6 million and a net increase of 0.18 million, and an ending fund balance of 0.089 million. Next, please. Here is a 5-year forecast for this fund. Revenue increases from 1.77 million in FY21 to 2 million in FY25. Debt service payments are level throughout the forecast at 1.59 million. There is no fund balance policy for this fund. Available ending fund balance in FY21 is 0.88 million, and this continues to grow to 2.53 million in FY25.
Rosita, could you recap
Yes,
for
sir.
council let's call it the restructuring that we did with Smart Financial or Ambassador Theater Group this year?
Yes. Can Jennifer Brown speak on that, please?
Yes, Mayor, this reflects the proposed amendment to the lease.
Okay, but go ahead and remind me, Jennifer. Jennifer May. Jennifer May.
Jennifer May.
Are you talking about the change in control?
For Ambassador Theater Group, well, we restructured their debt, correct?
We didn't restructure their debt. What we are looking at doing is an amendment to kind of restructure some of their rental payments for just a small period of time as they are being severely impacted by COVID. And this reflects all of that.
Okay, so, I mean, the debt is what it is. And
Yes, sir.
we were taking, I think, part of their escrow money to cover that debt portion, correct?
Yeah, so one of the things that we did through the lease amendment as part of a resiliency effort was they not only pay the amount of rent that is required to cover the debt service, but beginning a few years into the lease, they also began contributing essentially to build up several years worth of fund balance to cover the final years of the debt service, which was really just a protection and also a good thing for them in the end because it'll reduce their rental payments at the end of the lease years. And so what we did was utilize a portion of that kind of excess payment that they have been making and to offset some of the rent.
Okay, but that only continues, Jennifer, I think, for this year, currently,
Right.
the way we've got it structured.
Yes, so it'll go a little bit into fiscal year 21, but yes, sir, it's a very limited amount of not restructuring, but a limited amount of utilization.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
So that's the end of the debt service fund. I'll hand it over to Jesse to cover the general CNP projects now.
Good morning, everybody. Let's
Morning,
talk
Jesse.
about our 5-year capital improvement program.
Question, please.
Stuart, go ahead.
Thank you. So a question on the debt service fund. There is a chance that we might see a drop in assessed values, probably more likely on commercial as home sales seem to be doing very well. But So like in the general fund, we have, what we've done is we've decided to hold back on releasing funds until we have a very good idea that we actually have the funds. In the debt service, do we have a plan to hold back on issuing debt until we have a pretty good idea of what our assessed values are going to be over the next few years, or this year, for instance?
So I'll ask Jennifer Brown to comment on that, please.
So this year's values are set. They will not change. We have received our certified tax roll from the appraisal district. But should they change in the future, the tax rate is the tool that we have to offset any changes in value. And so that decision is made on an annual basis. And so it's very difficult to say, well, we're not going to move forward with these projects because future values might change, because then you're basically, once you issue the debt, you're legally obligated to set a tax rate to cover it. And so, but the flexibility that we have is that we have not built in any revaluation into the debt service forecast assumptions. So, right now, the flexibility is that we are able to shift the capacity within the existing tax rate from debt to O&M. We can also shift it back the other way if necessary, but that would be a decision that we would need to make in the future on an annual basis.
Thank you. One more, Mayor, please.
Go ahead, Stuart.
Never mind. I'm sorry. Go on. Never mind. Thank you.
Jennifer, the other thing I think that what I remember is when having the conversation with Mike and some of the assistant city managers early on, is we've been conservative about what capital projects we're going to pursue over time. So we've left ourselves some flexibility in that we're in other words, we're going to move forward in the general obligation bonds that were passed in November. We're going to move forward with some of the drainage projects, but everything else pretty much on hold. So that's a pretty conservative philosophy out over time that gives us some flexibility.
Right. And what Jesse's going to review over the next few slides will be that phasing plan, so that you can see how we're going to spread those projects out over the 5 years instead of implementing over a 3-year period like we originally thought.
Stuart, go ahead.
Yes, thank you. I remembered what I was going to ask. So as we move money out of the debt service into M&O, and we do have the fund balance, so our fund balance is going to drop over the next fiscal year. We are maintaining enough of a fund balance to maintain our credit rating?
Yes, sir. That is an intentional drawdown. And we had also, with the annexation, we had brought in some fund balances from the MUDs. And so we already had a plan to draw those down over several years as we're paying off the annexed MUD debt as well. And so that's partially being reflected in that plan as well.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Jesse.
All right, Jesse.
Okay, now let's talk about our 5-year capital improvement program. I will start with a quick overview of the CIP development process. First, we identify capital improvement needs, and those needs identified through master plans, asset management program, city council, citizen input, and state mandates. After we prioritize those needs, we need to identify funding sources to support the program. So in 2019, last November, the city took a $90.76 million GEO bond package to the voters, and it was passed overwhelmingly. Next one, please. Next slide, please. Yes, one of the workshop goals today is to review our financial strategy for the GEO bond projects. I'm going to discuss the project programming and project in detail and the delivery schedule. And I will start with the FY proposed GEO bond projects first, and then talk about FY 22 to 25 project list. Those projects are also considered all-year projects. It's a plan for now, and the subject to change depends on funding availability. Next one, please. So what is our financial strategy for deliver this GEO-bond program approved by the voter? If you may recall, at the June budget workshop, Jennifer Brown presented 3 debt capacity scenarios for the GEO-bond program. V is planned implementation, which is what we took to voter last November. It's a 3-year program with a proposed 3 cents tax increase in FY21. U is phased implementation. It is to extend the 3-year GEO-bond program into 5 years with a proposed 0.45 cents tax increase in FY21 to support the proposed projects in FY21. And additional tax rate increases will be required in next 3 years to support out-year projects. L is the delayed implementation, which will take 8 to 9 years to complete the GEO-bond program with the proposed 1 cent tax rate increase per year, but starting in FY23. And under this scenario, we won't have any debt capacity for GEO-bond projects in the first 2 years. Next one, please. So as discussed at June workshop, U scenario is recommended. Here are the highlights under this scenario. We will have approximately $12 million debt capacity available in FY21. That will allow us to start high priority drainage project design, and will also allow us to start high priority shovel ready project construction in FY21. And we will be able to focus on area of structure flooding design and construction in the first 2 years, and public safety training facility design can begin in FY23 and construction in FY24. So overall, under this scenario, all projects will be either under or complete construction in 5 years, with a focus on structure flooding area as top priority and balancing public safety, streets, and major rehab in the out years. And I would like to mention this proposed 5-year CIP plan was also presented to P&Z on July 14th and obtained the commissioner's recommendation to City Council. They did make a comment on one of the projects, which is Soldiers Field Extension, and I'm going to explain in more detail during the detailed project list discussion later on. Next one, please. So I'm going to start with the FY21 General Fund CIP, start with GEO-bond projects first, and at the end, I'm going to present the restrict funding project, which is one of the portion of the General Fund CIP. Please feel free to stop me if you have any questions on any projects. Okay, let's start with the GEO-bond drainage project. Austin Park Tombstone drainage improvements. This is one of the structured flooded area, and it's probably one of the single largest drainage improvement project we are ever going to do. It's about $16 million total cost and proposal design in FY21. And construction will need to break into 2 phases due to the size and funding ability. Greenwood Village drainage improvements. This is another structure flooded area. There are several houses in Greenwood Village experienced structure flooding on May 7th last year. Because it is a relative smaller size drainage project, total of $3 million, so we propose to do study, design, and construction all in FY24. Avalon Brazos Landing and Commonwealth drainage improvements. This is 2 phases. Phase 1 is the lake control structure modification, and phase 2 is the Elkins. We are going to combine design as one project and in FY21. And Telfair drainage improvements. This is to improve the intersection of New Territory and Chatham to reduce street ponding during major events, and also help access to our fire station number 7, designed in FY21. Next slide, please. Continue with the drainage projects, riverbed stormwater inlets and pipe replacement. This is a neighborhood drainage improvement project, reduce street ponding in that neighborhood, and designed in FY21. Flood control improvements, this is again 3 improvements are Oyster Creek and Lexington. This is also one of our shovel-ready projects, and it is also state mandate. This project will increase the stormwater passing rates during major events. We have design finished. Actually, we're currently working on the bidding package. As soon as the budget is approved, we can start construction right away. Next one is Sugar Creek drainage improvements. This is a Montclair Drive. The design was completed last year. It's shovel ready. But due to the size of the project, we have to break the project construction into 2 phases. Phase 1 is proposed in FY21 and starting at the southern part of Montclair with an estimate cost of $25 million. Next one is the citywide flood prevention and drainage study. This is to conduct flooding analysis of various locations and to prepare for future drainage projects, $600,000. So total drainage projects proposed in FY21 is approximately $11 million. Next one, please. Moving to the streets, we only have 2 streets projects. The first one is University Boulevard widening. This is one of 2017 Fulton County Mobility Bond project. County pays half, 50% of construction, and we pay another half. Proposed design in FY21. The project will add in 1 additional lane on each direction, starting from approximately 1 west all the way to the north of New Territory Boulevard. Next one is the citywide transportation and mobility study. This is to conduct transportation and mobility study to help the city to identify future corridor street mobility projects where improvements can provide for all forms of transportation. So total street projects, $600,000, and total geo bond proposed in FY21 is approximately $11.7 million. Next one, please. So here's the FY21 geo bond project distribution. As you can tell, drainage occupant 95% and streets 5%. So we truly focus on drainage projects, especially on the structured flooded area. Next one, please. Okay, that's all for the FY21 projects. Let's talk about the proposed FY22 to 25 projects. Start with drainage again. Austin Park Chimney Stone. I mentioned the design in FY21, but we break construction into 2 phases. Phase 1 will start in FY22, and phase 2 will start in FY23. And along Brazos Landing Commonwealth, this is the phase 1 lake structure modification construction proposed in FY22. And Telfair Drainage New Territory Boulevard Chatham construction proposed in FY23. Next one, please. Commonwealth drainage improvements. This is in Covington West and Imperial Woods. This is actually the last proposed drainage improvements in Covington Wood. We finished 5 drainage projects in the area already. The one we just finished is 7th Street and Sugar Mill. Staff conducted a walkthrough last week. This last improvement in Covington Wood design is proposed in FY22, construction FY25, with approximately $3.2 million total. Here comes the Montclair Phase 2 construction proposed in FY23 with approximately $4.3 million. And along Brazos Landing Commonwealth, Phase 2 improvements along Elkins proposed construction in FY24. And Riverbank Stormwater neighborhood drainage improvements proposed construction in FY24. So in the total, drainage projects in all years is approximately $36.4 million. Next slide, please. So moving to public safety and public facility category. First one is fire and EMS apparatus replacement. This is to replace 2 fire apparatus and 1 ambulance This is a scheduled replacement for those critical equipment for our public safety officers, and is scheduled in FY22. And public safety and public service building rehab, this is a major rehab for city-owned facilities, including fire stations, city hall annex, and the proposed construction all spread out from FY22 to 24 with approximately $1 million per year. Public training facility and proposed design in FY23, construction FY24, and total cost is approximately $10 million. The EOC building and the public safety dispatch building design proposed FY23. We actually have the design funded in current budget. Construction is proposed in FY25. So total public safety, public facility project category in the GO bond is $26.3 million. Next one, please. So animal shelter, proposed design in FY23. We propose to deliver the animal shelter with EOC as one project, potentially with a construction manager a risk deliver methodology. And the GO bond will fund $6.6 million, and additional $2.4 million will come from donation. So total project cost will be approximately $9 million for the new animal shelter. It's going to be located near the existing police building on Highway 6. Next one, please. Okay, moving to the street project, Soldiers Field Extension and the roundabout. Proposed to construct, this is actually going to be a shovel-ready project. We're currently wrapping up the design. The construction is proposed in FY22. I'm going to talk about in a little detail about the P&Z commissioners' questions or comments. The commissioners inquired whether there could be a left turn out of Soldiers Field when we connect to Highway 6, as offsite to we currently design only allow right turn only. The reasoning is that they think the road will be used by our emergency vehicles, and if the police emergency vehicles want to turn left, they will need to turn right first and go through the light, and then make the U-turn. But we actually look at the design for this option, make a left turn. It's not feasible and not safe. This is because the limited sight distance from the bridge, because the velocity people driving through the speed, driving through the streets, and also close proximity to the intersection of First Colony. So it's not recommended or make a left turn over there. And when we did the Highway 6 expansion quite a few years ago, it was actually built a staging area to allow the emergency vehicle to turn left with their emergency lights turned on. So that's the recommendation from the P&Z Commission for this particular project. Next one. Yes.
I'm sorry, was the recommendation to have a left turn or not to have a left turn?
I'm sorry, I didn't say it clearly. The commission, P&Z commissioners would like to have a left turn, but we won't make that recommendation to you guys because it's not safe. When during the design, we evaluated the option, is it feasible to make a left turn from Soldiers Field onto Highway 6? We don't think it's feasible, it's not safe. So we're not recommending it. Okay? Okay, moving to the major street rehab. This is our major street rehabilitation program with a total of $4 million spreading out from 22 to 25. Country Club Boulevard improvements. This is in Sugar Creek, from Sugar Creek Boulevard to Chesterfield. The total street reconstruction. The project will be combined with Montclair Drainage Improvement Phase 2 because in the same area, and with construction also proposed in FY23. The last one in the street category is the university widening. Design 21 I mentioned, and construction proposed in FY23. So total street projects in all years is approximately $9.6 million. So total GEO bond for FY22 to 25 is approximately $79 million. Next one, please. So that's all for the GEO bond 5-year delivery program. So let's talk about the FY21 to 25 restrict fund projects. And those are restrict funding projects can be only used for special purposes as listed here. First one is Owens Road. This is also one of the 2017 Fulton County Mobility Bond projects. We're currently doing the preliminary design, and proposed construction is in FY22. This is the current funding split. SLBC will fund approximately $3.3 million, and all the rest will come from the other funding needs of Fulton County Mobility Bond. Currently, both the mayor and our city manager, Chris, and other staff has been working with Fulton County and all the commissioners really closely, trying to push all the construction costs to the county through their 2020 Mobility Bond program, which they are proposed to go to the voter for the election in November this year.
Jesse, let me stop you for a minute. I've mentioned it before, but Chris needs to take the credit for negotiating a pretty strong position with the merchant to where we got increased funding, not only for Owens Road, which is also known as John Sharp Boulevard, but for a lot of the technology that we had in our proposed projects. So, I mean, that was a great job on behalf of, Chris, Jesse, Jennifer, all the people that were involved in that, because it's going to definitely shift. It's going to open up capacity for us for other projects because the county is now going to participate at a higher level. Go ahead, Jesse.
Thank you, Mayor. Moving to public arts, this is our annual program funded by SL4B. It's approximately $250,000 per year. And joint participation in CIP is also funded by SL4B, an annual program with $200,000 per year. Landscape replacement for major road and enhancement funded by SL4B again, annual program, $200,000 per year. Last one is the Colony Park Improvements Phase 2. This is funded by Colony Park Conservancy. They propose to fund $1 million in FY21 for the proposed improvements inside the park. So total restrict funds in the next 5 years is $17 million. Next one, please. Okay, let's look at the distribution of our 5-year capital improvement program. Our total is approximately $110 million. And you can tell country drainage occupied majority of the projects, accounting for 43%. And next largest is streets 21% and public safety 10%. And looking at the funding sources, 82% will be funded through the GEO bond program, and SLDC, SL4B, 6% other funding, like Conservancy, Colony Park Conservancy, and the Fulton County fund about approximately 12%. Next slide, please. If you don't have any questions, I'm going to turn to Rizita to talk about next steps.
Thanks, Jesse. Here are some key dates in the budget process. August 18 is the public hearing on PID assessment. September 1st is the public hearing on proposed budget and the first reading of the fee ordinance and PID assessment. September 8th is the public hearing on proposed tax rate. And on September 15th, approval of the FY21 budget, the 5-year CIP and compensation plan, adoption of the 2020 tax rate, and the second reading of the fee ordinance and PID assessment. Next, please. So our next budget workshop is on August 20th for the Enterprise Fund, along with the 5-year CIP for the Utility and Airport Fund. And the final workshop is on August 27th, where we'll cover the compensation and benefits, other funds, all other funds, including economic development and tourism. So that's the end of this part of the presentation. Are there any questions?
Anybody? No, go ahead,
Thank
Rosita.
you. Thank you.
Okay, Mayor, I'd like to actually, before we move on to the next item, I'd like to provide an update on sales tax.
Yes, ma'am.
Since it is
Please.
related to the budget workshop. You all are aware that when the pandemic began, we set out to do our revenue projections, and as with each passing day, as more restaurants and stores and venues were closed, events were canceled under our safe-at-home orders. Some of you felt that our worst-case scenario wasn't worst case enough. The good news is that while one of our most important revenue streams, sales tax, has been consistently down compared to budget, and significantly down when you look at it compared to last year's actuals, we're actually doing better than our worst case projections. And we did get our August allocation in yesterday, which represents June sales. It was once again strong in comparison to our worst case scenario. It was down about 11.7% compared to last year. But up compared to our worst case scenario in June. To date, June was probably the most open month of the economy since this all began. So the actual figures, get those pulled up real quick. While we actually don't have the detail of the what makes up the allocation yet, to be able to understand how the individual sectors performed, or which portions of the allocation are up or down or recurring versus one time. We did want to share this information this morning, and so that you would have that information and know that we are still monitoring this very closely. I know that some of you had some concerns that after our discussion last week that our FY21 sales tax projections and that 6-month recovery time frame was not, or maybe was a little overly aggressive, but remembering that we do have the control built in on the expenditure side, and that if we can continue to perform better than our projections, that we will be in really good shape. But it's not enough for us to recommend a change in our direction at this time, or even make changes to any of our estimates for fiscal year 21. So the actual figures that have come in, they were posted at 4.4 million was our allocation for the month. It is down, like I said, 11.76% year over year, but it is only down compared to the original budget by 3.61%. And this is just to refresh your memory, we were anticipating being down 50% in our retail and food and entertainment sectors overall. So we were expecting to be around 2.5 million for our allocation for the month. And so this was significantly better than we had anticipated, but again, not quite budget. So I'd be happy to take any overall questions on that, but just wanted to provide you that brief update. And know that we're continuing to monitor, and we will provide you updates as we have more information.
Jennifer, this is Joe. That 12% year over year, that didn't include any one time, did it?
It does. So last year we had an audit adjustment of $268,000, and so that 11% is a little skewed because of that. So last year our payment was around a little over $5 million. So really, if you were looking at it, like our budget was 4.6 million, and that is based on recurring sales. So when you look at that on a recurring basis, we are down about 6% year over year.
Okay, there we go.
So much better than we
Good
had
news.
built into
Yeah,
our worst
good
case scenarios. But again, we're still deep in the middle of this pandemic, and at this point, it's not enough to make me say, okay, we need to change what we're doing,
Right.
or loosen up on anything, or tighten up on anything, because we just don't know enough yet to make that recommendation.
Okay. Questions? Everybody good? Go ahead, Jennifer.
Okay, I think we're ready to move on to the next item if you want to read the caption.
So, item number 4, tax record vote. 4A, consideration of an action on setting the City of Sugar Land proposed 2020 tax rate, setting a public hearing and directing staff to publish the notice of proposed 2020 tax rate. Jennifer, I think you've got this one.
I do, sir. Thank you. All right. So, as we've discussed over the last 45 minutes or so and 2+ hours last week with the general fund and property tax, y'all are aware that property tax is one of the main sources of revenue for the general and the debt service funds. It is, as we've discussed, one of the few revenue streams that the city has control over. And it is by far the most stable source of revenue because we get the values once a year, we set the tax rate once a year, and the levies are mandated. Once we set that levy, it is a legal assessment, and it's subject to collections and penalties and things like that. So the funding does support both our general operations in the general fund, which includes our public safety, public works, parks, streets, drainage, and all the typical government type functions. But it also supports the GO bonds that will be issued for projects that were approved by the voters in November of 2019, and it supports our outstanding debt obligations. Next slide, please. As you can see, over time, we have lowered our tax rate from 50 cents in 1993 to the 33.2 cents that we have in 2020. Sorry, I'm getting ahead of myself. And by doing this, we've been able to achieve the second lowest tax rate in the state of Texas for cities our size. Next slide, please. So in addition to that, over the last 20 years or 30 years almost in this chart, as we have been able to lower that tax rate, we've also been able to increase the homestead exemption, realizing that once you lower the tax rate to a certain level, you just can't lower it beyond a certain point and continue to grow as a city. So in 2007, we started utilizing the homestead exemption to provide some tax relief on the residential side. And so we increased that from 1% to 5% in 2007. And today that's a 12% exemption. So that provides almost 4 cents of really net off the top tax relief to residential property owners who live in their homes here in Sugar Land. Next slide, please. So some changes due to Senate Bill 2 the process, what we're doing today is a process that we've been handling or been doing for many, many years. But just for those that aren't familiar, in the 86th legislature, sorry, my brain is not awake yet. The Senate Bill 2 was passed, and that is impacting some of the terminology, calculations, and deadlines and the processes that we have to follow this year. And so beginning with this year's tax for setting process, the effective tax rate, and what we used to refer to it, is now called the no new revenue tax rate. The rollback tax rate is now called the voter approval tax rate. And just to refresh your memory, the rollback rate previously allowed for an 8% increase on the maintenance and operations tax revenue side with a petition process for election. Next slide, please. And now the voter approval rate restricts that to a 3.5% increase on the maintenance and operations or over the no new revenue tax rate. And it requires a mandatory election in November if that 3.5% increase is exceeded, meaning that in order to, if you're going to grow maintenance and operations revenue more than 3.5%, that tax rate has to be approved in August, which is 71 days before the election. And so that really just backs up everything because you have to know what you're going to do to have your budget filed and all your hearings and everything, because you have to approve your budget before that deadline as well. And so the only exception is in the case of a disaster declaration, which would allow you to calculate the voter approval rate with an 8% increase in maintenance and operations revenue, and it waives the election requirement. And this is consistent with the previous limits that we had prior to Senate Bill 2. So City Council did enact this provision for the 2020 calculations back in July, and it was really just to provide the maximum flexibility to you all as decision-making body, not knowing, how the values were going to come in, what the process was going to look like, and to be able to get as much information such as yesterday's sales tax information before you're required to make a decision on the tax rate. So next slide, please. So just a reminder of the calculations that were performed under the new Truth in Taxation law. This slide shows the calculations both at the 8% and the 3.5%. Sorry, I'm combining those in my brain. And so with our current tax rate, which is the 2019 rate of 33.2 cents, the proposed rate of 33.65 cents for 2020. In both cases, the no new revenue rate is 0.324073, and the proposed rate is 3.84% over that no new revenue rate. That is in total, so that includes the 0.45 cent increase on the debt side. So, and then the voter approval rate, which in our case is adjusted by the sales tax for property tax reduction, which throws a whole nother layer of complexity into the calculations. At the 8% M&O increase, that voter approval rate is 0.350806. And even if we were calculating at the 3.5% increase, we would have been fine because that limit would have been 33.8317. So even if we hadn't enacted that option to calculate at the 8%, we're still under the 3.5% voter approval limit. Next slide, please. And then as Rosita and I both spoke to in the workshops, the proposed rate, the allocation this year would be to maintenance and operations. We're shifting 0.6 cents within the 33.2 cent existing tax rate from debt service to maintenance and operations, and then the 0.45 cent debt service increase is for the GO bonds. So that gives us an allocation of 20305 for maintenance and operations and 13345 for debt service for the total 3365 tax rate. And that is a little less than we had anticipated having to raise the tax rate for the GO bonds in the filed budget based on the assumptions that we had built around that. And that allows us to implement those drainage projects that are emphasizing structural flooding issues. Next slide, please. The impact to the residential tax bill under this scenario, and some of these calculations will actually show up in the notice that will be published. Based on the proposed rate, the actual tax rate increase is 1.36%. Our average home value is going or went up 1.08% from a little under $375,000 to a little under $379,000. With the 12% homestead exemption, that brings it down to around $333,000. And the annual city tax bill would be going up to by 2.46% to $1,122. That is a $27 annual increase compared to the prior year, which is around $2.25 per month. Next slide, please. So, all right, so the next steps. So after 2 days, today you're taking a record vote on the proposed tax rate, and that is not a decision on the tax rate. It is solely kicking off the next step of the process. And so once we have the record vote, the tax office will publish the notice of the public hearing, and I'm going to show you what that's going to look like. They will publish that in the newspaper, and we will post that notice on our website in a prominent place. We also will have to run a notice on SLTV 16 with substantially the same content for 60 seconds, 5 times a day for the 7 days preceding the public hearing, which would basically be the first week of September, and the 7 days preceding the vote on the tax rate. So basically the first 2 weeks of September, we would be running this notice at least 5 times a day on SLTV 16. Next slide, please. So within that notice of the public hearing, I've put it here in large bullets because once I show you what the screenshot of the notice is, I wanted to show you kind of the format of it, but it's very small. But this is the main content that is within the notice. Contains the proposed tax rate, which would be the maximum rate that you're allowed to consider, and is the rate that funds the budget as proposed. The calculated no new revenue tax rate of 324,073, and the voter approval tax rate at 350,806. We'll be setting a public hearing on that proposed tax rate September 8th at 5:30 p.m. And we'll also list the results of today's vote to consider the tax rate, and so your names will be listed and how you vote to consider this item. And then there's a table comparing the taxes on the average residence in Sugar Land, and if we'll go to the next slide, I'll show you what that table is made up of, and this, I showed this to you last week as well. It shows the total tax rate change from 2019 to 2020, the average homestead taxable value, the tax bill on that average homestead after the homestead exemption, and the tax levy on all properties. And that calculation is pulled from some of those truth in taxation calculations and includes things like refunds and adjustments to the tax roll. And it's a difficult figure to find and compare, but those formulas are mandated by the comptroller and how we calculate that. Next slide, please. So this is what the actual notice looks like, and I actually had the tax office put this notice together. The only thing that's missing is the result of today's vote that would be filled in the box there on how you all vote on this today. But this is basically what the notice is going to look like minus that information. All right, next slide, please. So the next steps are once we have the vote today, this notice will be published by the time they send the notice to the paper. We're looking at August 26th for a publication date, and public hearing is scheduled for September 8th. And then once we have the public hearing, the tax rate has to be adopted within 7 days. And so that puts us right in line with adoption on September 15th. After the budget is adopted, because you have to adopt the budget first and then the tax rate. Next slide, please. So the recommended action this morning is to take a record vote to consider the proposed 2020 tax rate of 0.3365, setting a public hearing for September 8th, 2020 at 5:30 p.m. at City Hall. And this would also direct the publication of the notice of the public hearing. We'll send this information to the tax office and we'll get that notice published. Next slide, please. I would be happy to take any questions and turn it over to you, Mayor, for the vote.
All right, I'll go ahead and make the motion that that's the proposed tax rate, setting the public hearing date and directing staff to publish the proposed 2020 tax rate. I'd also like to say, Mike, to you, Jennifer, the staff, I mean, I know you guys have agonized over this. I mean, you've kept council informed, from day one. I think it's been from where we thought we were going to be to where we are is a really good place. Be sitting here after what we've had to go through as a city with the sales and use tax shortfalls and everything else. So I think this is an extraordinary job on staff's part, and I know I speak for all the council members. So we appreciate that. So I've got the motion. Do I have a second?
Second.
Got a second by Gandhi. Any questions?
Question, Mayor.
No, Stuart, go ahead.
Just as an exercise, Jennifer Brown, let's say, for example, that we decided that we were not going to do any of the drainage projects this year, okay? That $11 million roughly that we were going to spend on drainage, would we even need to make an adjustment in the rate at all, year over year, roughly?
You would, yes, you're correct. We would not need to raise the tax rate. And if you decided not to move forward with those projects, but you would have to make that decision. We would need you to make that decision in the budget because once you set the tax rate, that's what it is for the year. And we would not move forward with any of those projects. So the policies that we have in place are that you raise the tax rate ahead of issuing the bonds. And so this 0.45 cent total increase is what's needed to fund the roughly $12 million in bond projects that are proposed for this year. But yes, you are correct. If you decided not to move forward with those projects, we would not need to raise the total tax rate.
Okay, so this basically boils down to $27 on the average home to fund some drainage and we're starting at homes that have flooded more than once in the last 5 years, yes?
Engineering would need to speak to the flooding perspective, but it is
more or less,
have flooded, yes.
More or less.
Yes.
Thank you.
Mrs. Jesse is correct. And not Covington Wood, I think Austin Park, Tombstone area, Cypress Park, several houses experienced twice in the past 3 years, actually, Harvey and May 7th.
Jesse, I think Great Woods just flooded once, though.
Yes, Greenwood once, May 7th last year.
Correct. Anyone else? Got a motion, got a second. I think this is a record vote, is it not, Jennifer?
That's correct.
Ramesh?
Aye.
Stuart?
Aye.
Steve? Steve, you were muted. I think he's saying aye. Raise your hand, Steve. There you go. Steve's in. Nashad?
Aye.
Jennifer?
Aye.
Carol?
Aye.
And I'm an aye. And it passes 7-0. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
We're ready to go.
All
Do you have a motion to adjourn?
Early this morning.
Got a motion to adjourn. Good job.
Thank you.
Thanks, Jennifer. Rosita?
Happy birthday to Carol.
Thank you very much.
Carol.
Thank
Dinner
you.
tonight at Irma's.
Happy birthday.
Dollar Carol, we're buying. You may have a lot of friends, Carol.